hopefully you can see the current slideshow, Chapter 2, Anatomy. Anybody? Okay,
excellent. Good. Thank you.
All right. Were you doing that one?
You were, Jim.
I'm doing that one? Oh, dang. Okay. Where is our... Yeah, I know. There we go. All right. Anatomy, there's a picture of a bee. You all recognize the bee. Okay. Exterior. I'll start at the head. It's got a couple of compound eyes. It's got a simple eye. It's got antenna, mandibles, and proboscis. You know, I'm covering up my stuff here. So there's two compound eyes, and they're made up of thousands of little lenses. They're little light sensitive cells which help the bees. They can recognize color, like light, directional information, and they can even see into the UV, the ultraviolet. They have the three simple eyes. They're arranged in a shape of a triangle above and between the compound eyes, and they're called ocelli. They mostly help the bee determine the amount of light present in the environment. And then they have antenna. That's their way of smelling. They can detect odors and sometimes even the direction of the odor, as well as measuring, get this, their speed, their flight speed. And let's see, I should mention again that the males have an extra segment from the females. The mandibles. The mandibles are the jaws of the bee. They help the bee eat the pollen. They cut and shape the wax. They feed the larvae. They clean the hive. They groom themselves. They bite intruders. And their first deterrent steps in a fight. Then the head also has the proboscis, and it's the tongue. Basically, it functions as for drinking nectar, honey, and water, and for exchanging food between the bees.
The bee dance taste test.
And the bee dance taste test. Yes. Well, when they exchange food between other bees, they can do that either to give the incoming food to the bees to be stored. They can be doing that to share food when food is scarce. They can do that during a bee dance when they're dancing and they want to give a sample so that the bee knows what it is that they're looking for in that direction and in that distance. So, that's a pretty handy item to have. Proboscis is good enough for that enough? Okay. Okay, the thorax. That's the main, that's where the muscles are that run the wings, essentially. They're and it has, of course, it holds the wings, and there's 4 of them. The forewing is bigger than the hind wing, and it's also used. They use the wings not only for flight, but they use them for cooling. Hind wing is usually attached to the forewing by hooks called hamuli, and allowing both pairs to move together. And it's also, the wings are also used to move heat away and cool a hive. Let's see. We have a message, an error message here about low system resources for audio, and we don't. Hopefully, you're hearing this. Give me a hands up if you hear this, because we're getting an error message. Okay. All right. And then, of course, not only are the wings on there, the legs are on there, and there's always 6 of them, as with all insects. And they use the forelegs to clean. They have hooks on them. They use them to clean the antenna. they use them to press and store pollen in the rear legs. They have brushes on them that allow that to happen. They use them to pack pollen into the cells. And then the rear legs have these, what they call them pollen baskets, the carbunculi that actually hold the pollen. So the legs are not just for propulsion; they're also the storage where they store things to haul them back. And then we have the abdomen. It says spiracle and sting there. The spiracles, of course, are the bees don't have a lung system. They just basically have tubes throughout the body, and where the tubes end on the outside, there's these little holes or spiracles, and it's just the entrance to these tubes for getting oxygen to the animal. So spiracles are just a way to get oxygen into the bee. There's 7 segments in the females, and they and not only, of course, the abdomen contains the reproductive organs in the queen, and the stinger in both the workers and the queen. There are 8 segments visible in the males, and they contain the male reproductive systems for the drone. The majority of the spiracles are located in the abdomen. The stinger has 2 lancets supported by hard plates, and they're connected to the poison sac, and the purpose of them, of course, is to inject venom into the intruder or for defense. And as you well know, it typically in the worker, they lose the stinger and their life when they sting somebody. I am having trouble with. Okay, that's it I have for this. Do you have anything to add to that one?
Not really, just it's important to know the different parts, because if, for example, if you suddenly start seeing all 4 wings very clearly on your bees because they aren't hooked together, that's a sign of a disease or a problem in the hive. So knowing that there's 4, but then seeing them not looking normal, you need to understand some things that are going on. And many people don't realize that bees can bite, and they prefer to bite first as a defense mechanism instead of stinging for obvious reasons. So if they can fight off an intruder just by biting them, which they try to do with other insects, that's something to be aware of as well.
Yeah, that when they disconnect the wings like that, it can be sometimes called K-wing, and it's an indicator of a virus problem usually. Okay, anybody don't see any questions?
No
Okay.
questions so far from what we're seeing.
Okay. They don't have blood, they have a hemolymph system, and it's just instead of blood, they have an open circulatory system, which just means that there's no blood vessels. It's just everything floats around in this hemolymph inside their body. And so the heart keeps that in circulation. So they do have a heart. Let's look at the next thing here. What do we got? Spiracles. We already talked about them. They're all those tubes we call. Tubes, by the way, are called trachea. And later on, we'll learn about trachea mites, which can get into those tubes and plug them up. Then they call it a honey stomach here. I'm looking on the picture to see if I can find it. On the picture that you see there, it's going to be called a crop. And that they can control the stuff going through the crop into their stomach and intestines. They can control that. So they basically fill the crop up and then with nectar, and then take it back to the hive and hand it off to other bees that are going to take it to storage. the brain, yeah, the brain has it says here in my notes that it has an excellent memory. And Ellen's probably going to tell you a story about what she thinks brains do as far as memory goes. Go ahead and do that for just now.
Well, the bee brain being excruciatingly tiny, their newest research says that it has the ability to do some rudimentary math problems, and they've trained the brain to trigger traps to dispense food. So that little itsy bitsy brain is sort of interesting, but I was sure that they had a memory ability in their brain, because a few years back we had our hives attacked by a badger, and they just totally knocked them over and destroyed them like you would think of a bear attacking a colony in hives, and frames were spread all over. It was relatively ugly. And I was home alone, and so responsible for putting things back together to the best of my ability. And obviously excruciatingly angry bees and defensive bees. And it was after that point that I decided to get a full suit, well, no, a full jacket at least, bee suit, which I had never had up until that time. But for weeks afterwards, Jack and I would be walking by the hives, and I would have different clothing on and not walking really close to the hives, and they would come after me. So they obviously remembered me being part of that trauma, and it was a long memory curve, and they didn't forget. And I'm almost convinced that they trained their youngsters to remember me as well. So yes, before all this research happened, I tried to convince other people that they do have a good memory, and that's my proof.
Okay. Oh, okay.
But on a serious note, they do get used to how you handle their hive when you're doing inspections and when you're just working them. And so the calm, smooth handling, they will recognize you and feel comfort with the fact that you're not going to do something untoward. A new person coming in that sort of doesn't know how to move frames and drops things on top of the hive and does other things, they'll also remember that person. And one of you will get a very different treatment from that colony than the other one. So just be aware that there's a reason why we say to work them calmly and smoothly and without a lot of rattling and dumping on them, because they do remember.
Yeah, technique can be amazing. We were watching a YouTube video of this lady beekeeper, commercial beekeeper in Germany, and she was working her bees in shorts, sandals, and a little light blouse and that. But watching her go through her hives, it was like
a dance.
A dance, yeah. It was quite amazing. Everything, she was extremely fast in the sense that she knew what she was doing and she didn't waste any time. But there was never a fast movement, or there was never a bump along the way. And she wasn't getting stung. She was just, and we watched that and said, wow, I wish we could do that. But it was impressive. So just technique can be very helpful. Oh, glands, and these lovely words to say, hypopharyngeal and Koshnikov, Mandelbar, I can say.
Venom, you can say.
Yeah, the hypopharyngeal is where it's up there in the head of the bee, and it's where one of the elements of the royal jelly come from. And so that bee that's going around feeding all those larvae 1,000 times a day, well, that's where the food is coming from, is that gland. Actually, some of it's coming from the mandibular gland as well. And that's not in your book. I guess that was someplace else I read that. But anyway, the hypopharyngeal gland is really important because it's how they feed their young. And now the Kashnikov gland, it's sort of their chemical factory. It produces something like 40 compounds and pheromones, and the pheromones that release from the bee stings to attract other bees in the area. That banana-like smell comes from that one too. So it's a gland that produces a lot of stuff and is used in a lot of communication. The mandibular gland.
Can I?
Yeah.
For those of you that have looked at your bees and it may not be warm enough and further enough along in the season, but so I haven't seen this so far this year, but that Koshnikov's gland, you'll see them with their rear end up in the air in the entrance of the hive, fanning their wings, and they're exposing that gland as a, for two reasons. One, to sort of alert other bees that this is their home, and also to alert their hive if there's a issue or a problem. So when you see them fanning there, they're attracting their bees to their colony and warning other bees away. So when you see that behavior, it's sort of fun. They're also ventilating the hive maybe, but that gland does a lot of work for the hive.
Okay, where are we at? Mandibular?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, when it's produced by the queen, it really affects the social behavior of the hive and the maintenance of the hive, and whether or not they're going to swarm or not is affected by that. If the scent is not spread throughout the hive, the colony will assume that the queen is failing, and they'll begin the process of replacement. But when it's produced by young workers, it produces this white substance when mixed with secretion from the hypopharyngeal gland results in royal jelly. So it does, okay. So that's the royal jelly comes about. But notice, I'm pointing at the screen again. Notice that the mandibular secretion, depending on who is doing it and when they're doing it, can be different things. Okay, venom. Yeah. Oh well. Okay, Nazanov. The Nazanov released by the worker bees to orient the colony members back to the hive or to the site of a new home when they're swarming. So you see them, like when you go out to catch a swarm, you'll drop them into a bucket or a box or whatever, and there'll be half of them still in the air. Well, it's this scent from the Nazanov gland that brings them all back together, and they gather back in your box or your whatever it is you use to keep it. And it's kind of fun to watch them. They march into that. You're catching whatever you're using to catch it with. Maybe we use a paper nuke because it's light, and they just march in like they were soldiers on parade. It's quite impressive. But they do that with scent, and Nazanov gland is in part of that process. Okay, venom. We all know what that is. It produces a toxic chemical. It's a protein. It's damaging to tissues if injected, and it's of course their final form of defense. And lastly, wax glands. You turn them over and look at them, and when they're particularly when there's a honey flow on and they're really building out wax, there'll be a lot of bees in there with these little flakes coming off the underside of them, and they're producing wax to for storage of honey, and of course for brood. It takes about they say 6 to 8 pounds of honey to make a pound of wax. And when it comes off, it's really white and pristine, It's it's kind of pretty stuff. And then they make the cells out of it. And the way they do that is they build a little tube with wax. They don't build a hex. But but if you had a bunch of tubes and you were to force them together, warm them up and squish them together, they go into a hex form because it's the optimal form for storage of anything in a space. So they don't actually, make these little hexal cells. They produce a tube and then they squish the tube together and it makes the cells. Okay, what else we got? Oh, sight. Senses. Well, they have, I've already said, they've got the 5 eyes, the 2 large compound eyes, and the 3 smaller ocelli on the top of the head. And they can see into the ultraviolet. So what they see and what we see is different. And the claim is that the color vision on the bee is the fastest in the world. It's 5 times faster than humans. So the refresh rate on color vision for bees is extremely fast. They would look at one of our TVs and think it was producing a bunch of frames instead of a smooth 3D vision. The antenna are what are used for the smell, and they're about 100 times more sensitive than a human. And they have about 170 odor receptors. So, here we are deficient again. We can't see into the UV, and they're 100 times better at smelling things. So that may be an advantage to us not to be able to smell some things. All right, touch. The antenna are also used for touch, as are a bunch of the hairs on their body. So the antenna, you can see them wiggling their antenna and touching things and checking things out. So they've got sight, smell, touch, and taste. But the tongue does contain some taste buds, and it can detect sweet and sour and bitter and salt. And finally, movement. Dances, it's kind of interesting. Dances provide distance and direction inside of a dark hive and on a vertical surface. So the vibration of the dance actually is part of how they communicate. So movement actually produces a vibration, which is then can be used to the dances that they do. And sound, they can detect air particle movement. I don't know, since they make sound, they obviously must be able to detect it, but they don't have ears like we do. They apparently detect it with
vibration sound.
Yeah,
the
air particles. I don't know how they detect air particle movement, but they do.
Well, basically how they're doing that, remember, they're in their hive, and this is where a lot of that communication is going on. And the hive is vertical frames. It's dark inside. And so their sight is used outside of the hive. The smell is used inside and outside. Touch is used inside mostly. Taste is inside, outside. Movement is almost totally inside the hive, and sound is almost totally inside the hive. So inside the hive, the movement and then the vibration of the air particles in there and their ability to sense that movement is how they do their communication. If you stop and think about transferring the information of direction and distance for a good nectar source, or finding a good new home site in the case of a swarm, when you're communicating that throughout that cluster of swarm bees, their ability to communicate is complex. It does involve all these different senses. their ability to smell through their antenna, and all the pheromones, which we talked about in the glands, really is what they use for communication. So knowing that they have these glands, that most of the glands are functional for a short period of time in each bee, serving a purpose for that role of the bee based on its age, and they go dormant after the bee gets past that age. The colony, if they need, for example, to have more comb produced because there's suddenly a surplus of nectar out there and they want to bring it back to the hive, they can actually communicate that to the bees and have bees whose glands atrophied in producing wax go ahead and regenerate and produce wax again. So it's through these senses that they communicate all of this information. Their ability to communicate and adapt accordingly is phenomenal.
Yeah, it really is phenomenal because, when you think about the bee dance where they're doing the dance and they're telling the hive not only what it is they're going after by bringing back a sample, but they're doing a dance that says how far away it is. But it's not really how far away it is. It's really how long it takes the bee to get there, because it may not be a straight line, because there's experiments where they'll have to go up and around something instead of going in a straight line. And the information they provide isn't the actual distance to the thing, it's the distance of the path to the thing that they have to take. And then they not only say how far and in what direction, but when the bee goes out to get, say, honey or nectar in this case, if you were you're managing an airplane and you want to get someplace and you only have so much cargo capacity, what you might do is provide enough, provide enough fuel to get there and then get back. But if it's, say, honey that you're after, or say it's fuel that you're after, you only want to take aboard enough fuel to get there, fuel up with the fuel, and bring that back and use that fuel on the way back. And that's what a honeybee does. They only take on enough fuel, carrying capacity, to get to where they're going to get the honey. And then they use part of the nectar to fuel their way back. And if they're wrong in the calculation, they can, it can be.
They don't make it.
They don't make it. Yeah. So it's pretty amazing that they actually do some kind of calculation to determine how much food to take out to get to where they're going, and not be carrying too much so that they can carry the maximum amount back. It's mind-boggling for a little insect with a little teeny brain.
Well, and the other part of that too is that if you have wind and gusts, it's not always uniform force that they're fighting. So to factor in wind and what that will do to their ability to get back home again, it is, we said it before, it's very, very impressive. And we could probably do a whole class just on bee communication. So I know we've got a little bit of time now because we're at the end of this particular chapter. So that's why we're talking a little bit more about the communication, just so that you're aware of all of the processing that goes on for each individual bee and then for the colony as a whole. That really is important as you're keeping your bees healthy and making sure that they're bringing in enough forage material, as well as providing them with the resources that they need if they can't bring it in.
Yeah, there's a book called Honeybee Democracy that's pretty amazing, and it goes into this in a lot of detail. And so if you're really interested in how bees work and how they think, and it's the hive that does the thinking as a unit. The colony actually is kind of like a brain in and of itself. So it's quite an interesting subject. So anyway, the book is called Honeybee Democracy.
So any questions about this chapter?
No questions. Where are we at on time?
We're plenty of time.
Yeah, you've got a good half hour.
Well, we're wide open to responding to any comments, questions. It doesn't have to be about the subjects that we covered, or we turn it back to Mary.
I think we may be done. I'm going to turn off the recording.